Story 1. Compound, the oldest continuously operated theme park in the United States. Lake Compounds. The place opened in 1846, but its history reaches back even further to the 1600s. Mattatucky Indian tribe leader Chief John Compound sold his territory to a group of white settlers. A few days later, John Compound had drowned in The Lake after attempting to cross it. Now under property of Gad Norton and Isaac Pierce, the land was first used as an area to test explosives, but later transformed it into a theme park. As the park expanded, so did its reputation. Lake Compounds is notorious, however, with a variety of tragic deaths that have occurred over the past 30 years. The first death was in 1981. A teenage girl fell out of one of the roller coasters after attempting to stand inside of her car due to a safety bar malfunction. Later in 2000, a young boy drowned in the lake unnoticed by lifeguards. His body was found almost half an hour later, curled up at the bottom. He died in the hospital about a week later. Before his death, he mentioned that it felt like something was pulling him to the bottom, though park officials figured that his foot was probably caught in some underwater flora that had grown in considerable length. A year later, a maintenance worker was decapitated by one of the roller coasters as he was trimming weeds near the track. Little did he know this was during the ride's testing hours. Because he was wearing earplugs, he could not hear the speeding train coming towards him. The most recent death was in 2004. When the branch of a dead tree broke off and struck a 5-year-old child near the mini-golf course, killing him instantly. The head general manager of the park at this time, Travis Burns, started to behave more strangely as noticed by fellow employees. Some days he'd show up hours late, or not at all. He would interact less with his fellow workers, and constant nervous, fidgety anxiety started to replace his regular light-hearted, down-to-earth demeanor. This erratic behavior ended when he eventually committed suicide by purposefully plummeting his car off a highway not far from the actual park. His family, friends, and co-workers speculated that it probably was because of all the stressful deaths and lawsuits he had to deal with because of its notable history of violent deaths. Lake Compounds has revised its policies to very strict levels to ensure safety. Since then, there have been no deaths in the park for 10 years. Reported deaths. That is, Lake Compounds operates from May to September, but reopens during October with their Halloween-themed title, The Haunted Graveyard. On weekends, the park opens at night and guests can go on rides besides the water park or walk through the optional haunted trail. The haunted trail is about a 45-minute walk through houses, graveyards, catacombs, and other horror-themed sets. Employee members dress up in frightening costumes and scare guests for a thrilling experience. This trail is located in the backwoods perimeter, wedged between the Employee Services Building and the large mountain that makes up the west side of the park. October of 2012, my friend Rick and I decided to go through the trail. At the front admissions gate, the employee recommended we start the trail first before going on rides because the line for the trail could last as long as 2 hours. It was obvious that the guy in the ticket booth gave everyone this information, since the line was already stretched by the time we rushed there. The wait wasn't too long, though. We already reached the entrance to the trail in about half an hour. While we waited in line, a Vincent Price-like voiceover. The intercom stated the rules. It was obviously a recording on loop that must have repeated over 50 times. We waited, up to the point where I started to recite the damn speech out of sheer boredom. When we reached the entrance, some young, disinterested female employee dressed in a shoddy cloak restated the rules to us in the most monotonous tone I've ever heard. Poor girl, I thought to myself, must suck being paid a minimum wage to repeat the same sentence over and over to a ton of people on a late Friday night. The first part of the trail was a medieval theme set, stone walls resembling the architecture of an old, worn-down castle lined either side of the path. Red light bulbs in the shape of torches patterned the walls, giving the path a red ambience. Gargoyles were perched atop various pillars, smiling down at us. Costume cast members were dressed up as druids and other religious zealots, repeating God knows what type of Bible verses over and over. This section wasn't very scary, of course, though I do admit it was very cool to look at. A very eerie song played in the back grew, and it sounded like a combination of Gregorian chants, a church organ, and heavy drums. We then reached what seemed to have been a torture room. Stretching tables, iron maidens, spiked bits, and cauldrons of boiling water made up the set as painful. Screams were heard in the background. Must have been just a recording of employees. A tall, muscular cast member dressed as an executioner stood at the end of the corridor, axe in hand. He beckoned for us to continue down the trail. The medieval-themed section was over, and now the trail transformed into some Aztec-themed jungle. Ruins, a vast amount of vegetation surrounded the path, difficult for me to tell if they were real plants or not. Stone statues of ritualistic Aztec idols decorated the area. A track of tribal I see repeated in the background, equipped with the sounds of birds tweeting and monkeys hollering. The large bushes and trees made it perfect for employees who were dressed in tribal gear to jump, pee out, and shock us. One of them scared us so unexpectedly that I actually slipped backwards and fell to the ground. Instead of helping me up, of course, Rick just laughed at me. We were always assholes to each other. It's how we pretty much became friends. The next portion of the trail was a graveyard, which was the most open area out of the whole trail since fake walls didn't surround it. The graveyard's area was a large square, so the walkway was in a zigzag fashion to cover the interior of the yard. Several tombstones were visible to look at, most with humorous text in them, such as, "Here lies Sir Thomas Drake, who stepped on the gas pedal instead of the brake." Corny as hell, but it lightened the mood for those who were scared. We were almost finished with the graveyard bit when I stopped and reached into my pockets. My wallet's gone. "Do you remember when you last had it?" Rick instinctively asked. "Dude, I don't know. It's probably somewhere back there." I pointed down the other direction of the path from where we walked previously. "Let's go find it then. Come on." We had to push through groups of guests who walked in the opposite direction as us while we walked back, resulting in dirty looks and comments on how we weren't following the rules. I didn't pay them any mind. I just wanted to find my wallet. When we reached the jungle-themed area again, it occurred to me that my wallet might have fallen out of my pocket when I slipped to the ground. We traversed through thick leaves hoping to find the exact spot, but the darkness of the night didn't make things any easier. As we walked, I kept thinking to myself that something wasn't the same. The path we were walking on didn't look familiar at all. I was still walking on a clearly defined dirt road lined with a rope fence, but I saw nothing else that resembled the set we ventured through earlier. The path suddenly halted as an enormous U.S. bushy tree blocked the end of it. Dead end. On a trail like this, without giving it much thought, I squeezed my way between the branches and leaves, hoping that I would end up back on the normal trail. When I made it through, branches whipped my face and leaves brushed against my body. I could hear Rick following me from behind. After what seemed to be a couple of minutes, I made it through and was in an open space again. Man, where the hell are we? I asked Rick. I turned around to see if he made it through, but no one was there. I called his name out again. No answer. Dumbass probably came out some other end, so I began to walk along the stretch of trees and bushes. I definitely was not on the main trail anymore, probably along the outskirts where guests weren't permitted to go. I was hoping to find some costume members so I could ask how to get back to where I was supposed to be, but I couldn't find anyone. Was I that far off course? I continued on, frantically looking in every direction, hoping to find something that could take me to where I wanted to go. I was hoping to hear sounds from the attraction itself, like background music, sound effects, or the screaming of guests, but the only sounds I heard were my footsteps on the dirt ground, the chirping of the crickets, and the drum-like beats of my heart. I started to panic. I had no idea where I was going in these godforsaken woods. With each step I felt as if I was wandering farther and farther from the park. I nearly started to run and bellow for help, but who would hear me? Then I heard it, a gurgled cry that elevated into a blood-curdling scream, a scream as mentally jarring as it was physically. Rick's scream. I bolted towards the direction from where the sound came. Had it been for the illumination of the moon, I might have ran straight into a tree. The longer I ran, the longer the scream dragged on. I could hear it coming closer, closer. Then the screaming stopped, but I was still running, my feet pounding the ground in a rhythmic fashion. I could see a light in the distance. It was a lamppost. The lampost's bright yellow leg illuminated anything within 10 feet of it. I looked on the dirt ground and saw Rick. I recognized him by his gray hoodie and dark blue jeans. His right arm was twisted across the front of his body, his left arm bent backwards at the elbow. His legs were sprawled out and contorted. Dark, crimson blood pooled where his head was. Where his head was supposed to be. My whole body went stiff. My skin tingled from the cold sweat that surrounded every inch of me. I could feel bile climbing up my throat. I quickly turned and looked away. Squeezing my eyes shut, I felt like vomiting, but it just wouldn't come out. When I finally had the courage to open my eyes, I did so extremely slowly. Bit by bit, I turned back to Rick's body. That's when I saw it. It was a man, a tall stature, broad shoulders, long arms. A ghost white dress shirt covered its physically imposing body, complemented by a thick black tie and black dress pants, blood-stained gauze-wrapped arrow, and its head that covered everything but its eyes and mouth, those soul-piercing, Hungry eyes stared me down. That awful smile, adorned with crooked yellow teeth, drooling, groaning in its wry. Hand was my wallet. In the left hand hung Rick's head, eyes rolled back, mouth gaping, fresh blood dripping from his neck and pooling onto the ground. It was almost a blur at that point. All I remembered was running for my dear life, finding my way back on the trail, pushing through other people, and making it to the exit. I screamed for someone to help, but the theme park's Halloween-themed occasion had voided any real concern for my well-being. Guests looked at me like I was just some nut playing pranks. I didn't know whom to tell. Nobody would have believed me if I told them what I saw, considering that it happened in a haunted attraction. I couldn't just tell anyone there. I needed to take it one step further. I contacted the authorities and told them everything that I saw. They looked through the entire proximity, including the haunted trail itself as well as the rest of the surrounding woods. They found nothing, no blood, no body, nobody. Story 2, the Hill Beast. No one hears much about the little town of St. Paul's, North Carolina. It's located in the southern part of North Carolina, literally 2 hours away from the South Carolina border. It's a quiet town located right off of the Interstate 95. When you get off the St. Paul's exit, the first thing you see in front of you is the ABC liquor store. You turn to your right. There's a Days Inn hotel owned by the Patel family. I graduated with their son. He was valedictorian of his class. Beside the Days Inn is a McDonald's. It stays busy with visitors that often stop tea here during long trips. Across the street is the Burger King, which has the worst service you'll ever get. I ordered chicken strips from there and got raw chicken twice. Something about their atmosphere. He just reeks of laziness. But I'm getting off the point. You turn to your right on a little road called Odom Drive that's right past the McDonald's. There's an empty field to your right and a neighborhood to your left. You turn into the neighborhood, and there's a little yellow house that looks in shambles to the left. That's mine. I live there with my younger brother and our parents. We've lived there practically my whole life. But back to that road you're on. Before you turn into my yard, you'll notice to the right, across from my house, is woods. Those woods have been a source of stress for me all the time I've lived there. They aren't so bad during the day, but I get the feeling in the pit of my stomach that something watches me from them. I'm not so terrified that I've never entered. I have actually journeyed through them, but again, only during the day. My journey usually allows me to clearly see the house through the tree lines or the little tree hole my neighbor built for his kids. I remember once journeying in with that neighbor and his kids when I was perhaps 12. That was the first time I ever saw the swamp. Dirty green-colored water that was opaque and mud-like. It was the farthest I'd ever journeyed into those woods. I felt as if I'd been invasive or something, like I'd found something not meant to be seen by the human. Maybe that makes me sound like I fear nature, but in fact I find nature very beautiful. However, something about that swamp seemed bottomless. I believe a deep, dark, old danger lived in those woods I was in its natural habitat and invaded its personal space. After this, I never journeyed any farther than the edge of those woods. I have always believed in supernatural things. Even as a child, I had a sense about not playing with fire. as one would say. My parents often warned me that the woods had very wild animals. We even supposedly had an alligator come from the swamp and try to cross that bus. Why rode between McDonald's and Burger King. I recall bats being popular visitors at dusk and dawn, and snakes were common visitors to our yard. One night my dad and I went out looking at fireflies. It was the first time I had ever seen them in real life and not on television. I thought it was cool that the fireflies were in the edge of the woods, and the sun had sunk quite significantly in the sky. I remember this feeling of something coming from the back of the woods edging towards us. Something was dark and determined. I tugged my dad's shirt and insisted we go back in. He seemed disappointed that my timid side had shown, but he obliged. My parents seemed to strongly support the belief that I had a very overactive imagination. I am an artist after all, so they were on. Wrong. I remember having a nightmare the night we saw the fireflies in it. We had stayed watching fireflies, and I had ignored that gut-wrenching feeling in my chest. Something large that I couldn't see came running through the trees, tearing after my father and I. We ran for the house. We ran for our lives. I collapsed as my foot caught something in its path. I struggled to fight the overwhelmingly heavy defeat when the form collapsed onto me, and I heard the sounds of heavy breathing in my ears. The pressure of teeth shot through my ears in a horrid pain. I finally jolted awake. There we were. Many times I had vivid nightmares. My autistic mind led me to dreams that were just so much more real and detailed than most people as I aged, though I simply got used to those types of things. It was rare that I didn't have nightmares. Maybe my parents were right, and I did have a very overactive imagination. Time passed pretty quickly, and eventually I was in college. I remember very clearly being a college senior, ready to get out of school and start my life. I think most people have that blind excitement of not knowing what is to come. At least I know I did. It was spring, and the flowers had finally started coming out. I hadn't actually had a nightmare in a few weeks. This is where things started to get strange, though. I remember one night I had gone to bed pretty early, around 10, to get a lengthy good night's rest. I remember kicking my blanket half off of me because it was hot. I had always been very warm-blooded for some reason, so I slept better when it was cooler. But this night I decided that the temperature mattered not a lot because there was a lot to be done the next day. Eventually the exhaustion succumbed to sleep. I remember running frantically before tripping. I turned to face what looked like a rabid wolf. It was growling, ferocious, and edging closer, slowly and ominously. Its eyes had a film over them, making it appear blind, but yet it looked right into my soul. It was then that its head contorted upside down, still bearing into my soul as the deformed beast edged closer. I jolted awake. I looked at the clock, which read 3 a.m. I collapsed back into my pillows and stared at the ceiling. The next night I anxiously went to bed. I closed my eyes and dreamless sleep awaited, but relief was short-lived when I woke up again at 3 a.m. I sat up, having this ominous feeling return to my chest. I gasped in the hot North Carolinian air. I looked at my window. The blinds were closed except one that appeared to be drooping open. This wasn't abnormal, as I occasionally peek through them. This night, however, I decided it was in my best interest to close them. I had just got to the window when a shadow darted across and the blind closed on its own. Terror rose as I returned to the shelter of my bed. The next morning I grabbed the tape and taped them shut. I remember the third day was hot and I had been finishing up with my class. My mother called to inform me that my grandfather was ill and she needed me to come get her from the rest home where he was raised. IDING. I drove to the rest home and we visited for a little while. I remember sitting in the rest home waiting on my mother to help my grandfather eat. I had pulled up my laptop to work on a paper when a dog entered the room. Its eyes were glazed over, just like the beast in my dream, making my heart sink. But its kind presence was undeniable, so I reached down to pet it. The dog gently raised its head in my lap. It looked at me, and I felt as though it actually may be trying to warn me about something. My mother emerged from the room, and we left for home. My driveway in the backyard resides next to a hill. Being as we don't own that land, we have no permission to touch it because it's owned by the town. Therefore, there are overgrown weeds that make it impossible to see over. On many occasions, my dad would grumble that there could be bums right next to us ready to rob us, and we'd never know. Nonetheless, it was overgrown, and no one could do much, so complaining got us nowhere. My mother was frustrated about the complications with my grandfather's illness, and I recall letting her drive home. Driving somehow channeled that anger. I won't say it soothed it, but by the time we got home and got out the car, I knew she'd be all right. That's how it always worked. She had been extremely stressed, and I just let her vent. We finally arrived home. I remember us talking, but not what about. It isn't very important in the grand scheme of things, just that we had both exited the car and were continuing the conversation. The car lights were fading slowly out. The conversation was cut abruptly short when the sound of rustling filled my ears. I turned to face its source, the hill. To my surprise, my mother, too, was very attentively staring. I watched as the moonlight hit what appeared to be brown fur. It descended from the hill. It was then that the sounds of heavy breathing raised to our ears. My mother, who had always said I had a very overactive imagination, the same woman who usually said, "Pay it no mind," now said, "What is that?" I heard the creature charging toward us and remember only one thing, my voice yelling, "Run, Mom!" We ran into the safety of our house, quickly closing the door behind us. My dad and younger brother greeted us, noticing our obvious terror. They grabbed flashlights, shining them out into the yard while remaining safely behind the glass door we had just run through. My brother muttered, "I think I see a dog." Or something furry. My dad nodded. "Sounds like it. It's just a coyote." My mother retorted, "Why would it come to the car, though? I've never seen a coyote come to the car." My brother shrugged. "Maybe it's rabid." I remember a sense of relief, that for once I wasn't over-exaggerating, that maybe if I was right this time, I had been right the other times I sensed an ominous presence. In which case, was this thing following me long before? Was it what I saw in my dream? I had a lot of unanswered questions, and sleep had been much harder to obtain. The next day I left for the weekend to go on a trip. My return was met with findings of my younger brother and father. They had been cleaning the yard that weekend. When they got to my mother's car, they found something they had not expected. By the back tire was an animal hind leg, stripped of nearly all its meat to the bone. In fact, the only hint that it was even an animal was the paw. Upon further inspection, the leg appeared to belong to a larger raccoon. We decided to see if perhaps there was any race of this beast on the hill. All we saw were possible raccoon tracks and what looked like a bigger animal's paw print. I never saw the beast again after this. My brother came home telling stories about the adjoining neighborhood. A wild animal the size of a Great Dane had been seen across the neighborhoods and was aimlessly eating squirrels and other small animals. One of my brother's friends that live on the street told of his personal encounter. He had taken the trash out after dusk when the beast approached him. He owned a German shepherd who leapt to defend him. The beast easily grabbed the German shepherd and tossed him into a nearby wall, wounding the dog. However, my brother's friend had already entered the house and avoided conflict. I've never seen the beast again. I don't know if it still lurks in our swamp. Sometimes I think I may hear it lurking in the swamp, but I've never dared to let curiosity get the better of me. I do what I've always done: go into the house and never leave after dark. The dark is full of fears beyond comprehension. Fear that summoned a beast that terrorizes the little town of St. Paul's. Story 3. 1 Mississippi. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4. Your child may be gone, but there is no need to mourn. I live in an isolated place, a big, old neighborhood where the homes are further apart and ravines cut our yards deep. My house is isolated even more from the others, separated by a screen of oppressive pine trees, swaths of dead grass, and acres upon acres of ragged trails. My parents never let me explore those paths. They said people often lost their way, even in our neighborhood. Why, just last month a little girl had disappeared during a massive storm surge. My parents had been incredibly distraught about it, moaning about how important it was to heed those warnings. Word was she was never found. I was smart enough to listen, though I stayed inside, under my covers, and watched as lightning tore jagged, white-hot path across the sky. A few moments later, the jaw-tingling boom of thunder would sound. My parents were asleep in the room above mine. They taught me how to gauge the distance of a storm, wait for a flash of light to fill night sky, count by Mississippis, and divide by 5. For every 5 seconds, the storm was a mile away. I had a tough time with numbers other than 5. We were only just learning how to divide in school. I counted to 10 Mississippi this time before the thunder rolled over me, filling my ears with a cacophony of brass roars. The sound didn't scare me. In an odd way, it was rather comforting, affording me the false security of the brick and glass that separated me from the elements. Neither the blinding light nor the deafening tremors could reach me. I looked up at my ceiling, watching the shadows of the trees shudder across the rough, white paint, an eerily beautiful sight. My ragged fleece blanket was knotted in my arms, and my head cradled in an overly plush pillow. I lay prone, waiting for the next crash of thunder. It filled my ears at 8 Mississippi this time. I rubbed the blanket with my cheek, struggling to do the math. About a mile and a bit away, as the thunder died away, a different sound permeated my perfect silence. A creak followed by a dry scuff. Then silence again. My neck hairs prickled and I curled, in harder against myself. Another flash spread throughout the room. I felt thankful, feeling the familiar fear of nature's staggering power wash away any annies. I counted again, clutching my blanket close. 5 Mississippi. The storm was closing in, the thunder a harbinger of the damage that would follow. Another flash illuminated my room through the big window opposite my bed. I made out the purple outlines of the sparse trees beyond, shuddering briefly as I imagined being out there among them. At least I had my home, my room, my bed. Another peal of thunder washed over me. 4 Mississippis later, when it died, I heard yet another creak of the floorboards. I remained frozen, convincing myself there was no threat. If I could not see it, a fresh flash of light blazed through my bedroom, and for a fraction of a second I made out a flicker of movement just to the right of my window. I stared at that spot in my bedroom, trying to detach some imagined entity from the well of shadows formed by the corner of my room. Just as my eyes settled on the darkness of that spot, a new flash bloomed within the darkness, and I was blinded once more. Groaning, I squeezed my eyes shut. I was not scared of thunderstorms. Dogs were, other kids were, even my parents jolted from the occasional crack of thunder. I did not. I observed them, measured their distance, took comfort from them. It took me a few moments to discover what was wrong with that last flash. No thunder echoed after it. I tried to recall my count, but realized I hadn't done it. I waited for the next spire of lightning to blaze across the trees beyond, and actually sighed in relief when it did. But in that moment something else caught my attention. As the lightning filled my room, a secondary burst of light seemed to pop up just beyond the fringes of my window. I peered hard into the trees as their black-purple outlines were electrified across my vision, but nothing else appeared. With another groan, I buried my head against my pillow and peeked out from under one guarded eyelid. The thunder rolled across my room at a 3 Mississippi count this time, but again an eerie creak seemed to dog at its heels. I scanned my window, searching for any flicker of movement, but none appeared. There was nothing there, only Mother Nature in all her awe-inspiring power, waging a war of electrified plasma and sonic concussions against the earth. I began to doze. My guarded gaze dipped in and out of consciousness, blurring and refocusing on the window. In my mind, I kept up the tally, wondering when the storm would hit us. Those flashes bombarded my eyelids, casting spectral outlines of the trees against the weird, red void I got when I tried to squeeze my eyes shut. I found I was reaching out more with my ears for any discrepancies, cataloging the thunder's ripples just as a flash flickered across my reddened vision. Exhaustion must have dulled my senses, because at some point I began to realize the thunder didn't always match up with lightning flashes. Sometimes it would just be the flash, followed by a creak. I'd struggle to erase the creaking from my mind, burying one fear under another, but it was getting harder to ignore. Fear paralyzed me, keeping me from reaching out into the darkness of my room to confront my suspicions. I kept gazing out the window, praying for the next flash of lightning. Instead, the next flash popped up to the left side of my bed. I saw in the window an outline of some sort, vaguely humanoid and thin. I yearned for it to be a tree, but a growing sense of dread took hold of the logical part of my mind. It was something far worse. Remaining still as a mannequin, I peeked from the cubby hole of my covers and under my eyelid, and applied the lightning distance principle to this new phenomenon. A flash T. In Mississippi, another creek, another flash. 7 Mississippi, another creek. Each pulse of light bringing to fruition the thing's gangly black limbs in my window. It was getting closer to my house. There was another flash, this one coupled with a lick of lightning. 5 Mississippi. I couldn't hear the creek this time due to the thunder, but when the booming roar died away, I almost screamed. There was a breathing sound, raspy, dry, almost hungry. It was coming from my left again. I clenched my blanket to my chest, trying not to sob from the revelation. The figure Washington S in my room, I had been observing its reflection in the light of the flashes. Another blaze of light charged the room for a moment, followed by an additional creak. Ice coiled around my spine as I fell. My covers gently crinkle and my mattress dip ever so lightly. Another flash accompanied by that disgusting breathing and a very faint whine of a Polaroid camera. I didn't move. Couldn't move. You don't roll over to face a terror. It went against every animalistic instinct we had. Instead, I lay there, feeling long, slender fingers coil around my sheets, and the thing's weight shift even closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, abandoning my peephole. Lightning bloomed once again against my window, and the outline of something grotesque hunched over my bed took shape against my eyelids. He breathed noisily, the camera dangling around his neck and his shirt unbuttoned. I shuddered as I felt his mouth touch the base of my neck, and then his tongue slip up along the back of it. In the window, I could see him practically smothering me, his greasy clothes ragged with dirt and mud. He had a scratchy beard, and his breath smelled of rotting meat as he placed one gnarled hand on my thigh and began brushing upwards. His lips hovered just above my ear, pulling back my dark hair and touching the skin. I wondered where ye disappeared to, he said in a crusty wisp. Thought them woods claimed ye. He rolled me over fully, a malicious grin splitting his pockmarked face. Glad ye survived. He held up his camera. We's gonna have some more fun now. Right? I stared back at him, wordless. He rose the camera to his face and took another picture. Then he screamed. I guess he must have finally seen my face. The flesh sloughed off my skull, the tendons wrapped tight around my right cheek and jawline, the black socket of my left. I gazed back at him, condemning and joyful. He stumbled back off the bed, blubbering like a baby. I slowly followed. He'd come for me the month before, during another storm. He'd taken pictures of me, forgot knew how long, worming slowly into my bedroom and stealing me into the night. He knew the paths that sped every which way beyond my home. Sure no one would ever find us, but I'd escaped. I fled into the woods during that storm, but soon I too became lost. I'd fallen asleep counting, hunting for eternity. And then I'd awoken once more. It was during another storm. I knew where to go. My parents' grief could never be mended, but I could still make things right. I knew he'd come. He's searching, crawling back to my room like a cockroach. And here he was, sobbing pitifully at the foot of a little girl's bed. I stepped off the bed slowly, watching him scramble back towards the window. There was nowhere he could go. A flash of lightning glinted off my alabaster skull, echoing through my mind as I knelt down beside the creep Mercy does not await you. I intoned in a dry voice, your remains shall never be recovered, never relinquished, never put to rest. He looked back with wild yellow eyes. I rested a skeletal hand on his shoulder. Now come, El. Let us have some fun in the woods, he cried out as my grip tightened, then screamed blindly as my fingers pierced into his tendons, hooked his collarbone, and dragged him behind. He kicked and flailed, hit and sprayed garbled prayers into the night, but the thunder drowned him out. He couldn't stop me. Deep into the woods we traveled, further than any sane human might travel. At some point he passed out from pain. The camera still dangled around his neck, filled to the brim with memories of his past atrocities. I came to a stop in a small clearing, where a tree split by lightning. Sat there. I slung the bumbling creep at the base of the tree and slapped him to make sure he awoke. He looked around blindly, crusty features thick with fear. I lifted him into the splintered trunk of the oak and pierced his arms and legs with shattered wood. There he screamed and foamed, but unable to move as I stepped forward and took the camera from his neck. One picture, a flash in the night, I murmured, raising the camera to my socket and taking a candid. That is all anyone will remember you by. I stepped up and wrapped my fingers around his greasy neck, or slamming the camera into his mouth, shattering his teeth, and lodging it in his jaws. Pictures continue to roll off, illuminating his chest and throat as he wept and struggled weakly. I backed up, smiling, remembering the pictures he'd taken of me. I counted the time between each flash, slipping further and further into the woods. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, lightning flared and thunder roared, and I disappeared into the night. The police would never know what happened to the little girl who disappeared. There would be an area-wide search, missing posters, 9 yards, but no one would ever find anything. The only thing the parents found that was remotely interesting was a bit of dirt in their child's bed and a room that had been locked for weeks, and a single solitary photograph buried under her blanket, a picture of a shattered oak tree, and one simple phrase written on the back: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4. Your child may be gone, but there is no need to mourn. Story for the Pale Emperor. I had always wondered what the bottom of a lake looked like, and now I know. It looks like the sun setting over the horizon, where the farthest depths of sky are black. But you can see a kind of layered improvement in the light the farther along you get. I wouldn't be able to see anything at all on here if it wasn't for the full moon, at least here. Near the bottom of the lake, I was safe, I think. I knew that with every breath I drew, the oxygen level in the car drained. If I died here, at least it would be my way, instead of dying at the hands of that thing. The ambiguous mass of shapeless dark that could keep up with my car, even though it was going 85 miles per hour before I crashed. If I didn't have a 4-cylinder engine, I would have gone faster and may have gotten away. I first met him when I was 6, and he was the perfect house guest when we had our tea party. He wanted to bring his friends, but I insisted that I get to know him first. His friends made me feel weird anyways, because even though I couldn't see them, I could hear them talking to us. I showed him all my St. Uft toys and baby dolls, and I asked if his friends might like to play with them too. He liked my toys, but he said real friends are better, and one day I'd have lots of real friends, maybe Watar. And ever I met his friends, we'd all be friends and have so much fun we wouldn't need any toys. I told my mother all about him, how his friends called him the Pale Emperor, and she forbade me from imagining him again. Mother was a very stern Christian and thought such nonsense was surely the work of the devil. Sullen, I explained how in Sunday school we were taught that God wanted us to make free etias. She looked down her nose at me and said that only applied to real friends and real people. I tried to defend Pale, but she wouldn't have any of that nonsense. I scoffed at her behind the see-loose door of my room. Pale sensed that I was distressed and asked what happened. I told him what my mother said. He didn't like that at all. Next Sunday, when we were at church, a big, heavy wooden cross fell off the high arch ceiling and split her head open, spewing her brain natter on me. My mouth was open, singing psalms, and as hard as I tried to deny it, I know I ate some of her bra. In tissue, Pale didn't show up until after the closed casket funeral. I was absolutely furious. I told Pale that I knew what he did. I told him God doesn't let killers into heaven. They burn in hell, and that's what he was going to do one day. He didn't like that. Pale stopped appearing in front of me entirely. I was glad for that, because when I yelled at him that night, he was changing. His skin grew darker, especially around his eyes, which were beginning to turn yellow. The more I yelled at him, the more yellow they became. He got taller, and his hands started to meld together and become webbed. He didn't look like a real person anymore. After that, Pale started to come only at night, but he stayed hidden. What I had once considered a friend was now a stranger, lurking in the dark. I could hear him whispering from the closet, asking me to come play. Other times I heard him giggling from under my bed, telling me that all his friends were there, everyone but me. He only wanted to play again, and that if I did, we would be friends forever. He got mad because I told him wouldn't play with him, and I wouldn't be his friend. He started shaking the bed violently. At that point, I started to fear him. I didn't talk to him anymore. He didn't like that. It wasn't until I was 7, on an unusually dark night, I awoke to voices. I recognized them as his friends, but they weren't encouraging and cheerful like they were before. The voices under my bed were crying for help, saying they were trapped there, and that I'd be trapped there, too. I put my head under my covers, but I saw Pale under there. His eyes were glowing bright yellow, and he smiled. I could see his elongated, jagged teeth by the mere light of his demonic eyes. I scur. He really didn't like that. I flung the covers off me in a panic and started to run to the hall. I fell when I was almost at the door. I heard Dad moving somewhere in the house. Something cold had closed around my leg, and I shouted again. It was shadows, but the shadows looked like hands clasped around my leg, and they were touching me. I could feel them, cold, dead, and pulling me to their dark home under the bed. I jerked and pulled, pleading with Pale to stop his friends. He said my mom was there too, and she had decided to be his friend. Why couldn't I? His friends pulled so hard that I slid quickly across the room towards the underside of the bed, and I saw several bright yellow eyes under there, all belonging to Pale. The lights came on and Dad came rough the door. I stood up and tried to run to him, but I fell again, sobbing. My leg was so clawed and mangled that I couldn't walk. My father taped a towel across my leg to stop the bleeding and rushed me to the hospital. The doctors said they had only seen such injuries in feral animal attacks and suicidal cases. My father denied their recommendation to put in an asylum. The doctors said I cowl. Did really wind up hurt or worse. We came back to the house, and I didn't see him that night, and I had stayed wide awake for most of it. I had hoped the light had hurt him. Soon after, we packed and left for an apartment down the road. Father wanted to so he wouldn't have to relive the memories of Mom in that house, and I wanted to so I wouldn't be terrorized by her killer. I hadn't seen him until tonight, almost 20 years later. I sensed him before I saw him, but it was a presence as familiar to me now as it was then. I immediately grabbed the keys to my car to leave and go stay with a friend. As I passed the doors down the hall, I saw him in the bathroom first, then each room after that, smiling that terrifying, carnivorous grin. As I flung open the door to sprint out, I heard the cries of his friends, pleading with me not to go. I did anyways. He didn't like that. I pulled out of the driveway, and with the screech of tires, I was gone. I was sobbing hysterically, barely able to see the road ahead of me. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was standing in the middle of the road. As I drove farther away, he didn't move farther away. He was as unmoving as the road, yet still ever present. I picked up speed. I saw him jerking, moving unnaturally, inhumanly. I glanced down at the speedometer, 80, 82, 83. I looked back, and he was almost upon me, 85. I snapped my attention to the road. In front of me, he was there, watching with his bright yellow eyes. I grit my teeth and prepared for impact. He disappeared as soon as my Civic hit him, but the steering completely failed, and I veered off the road. When I ran my car into the water because of that shapeless dark, I blacked out briefly. Next thing I knew, it was slowly sliding upside down to a drop-off point. I looked through the windows of the car. If there was ever a blacker than black, it would be at the bottom of this lake. I glanced hound for my purse. In the crash, everything flew everywhere, and my car wasn't the cleanest of sorts. I found my purse in a Subway wrapper smudged with BBQ sauce. I sat up on the ceiling and rested my upper back on the seat where my lower back was meant to be. I fumbled about my purse, pulling out a pack of Marlboro Reds, or as my father called them, cowboy killers. If I was going to die, I wanted a damn cigarette. I hadn't even thought about making a break for the surface. I refused to go where he was. A part of me actually wanted to die here, at least away from him. I bed the lighting mechanism of my wine-proof lighter. I stared down at the flame and drew deeply from the cigarette. When I looked up, my heart stopped. At first I thought it was from the lighter, because there was a little yellow light at the bottom of the lake. However, they began to multiply. The lights and the darkness came closer. I realized that the car was moving to the drop-off point. The wine-proof lighter blew out. I looked behind me and screamed. The pale emperor was pushing the car. My breaths were labored as I kicked the window, trying to escape. He hated that. A gurgled growl rang in my head, and I was certain I was going to die here if I didn't get out now. Precious moments went by, and the drop-off point came ever closer. I frantically looked around my car for something to bash the window open with. Everything was so scattered, so chaotic. I scanned the clutter, opened the glove box, but I could find nothing. Then I thought of the metal cigarette box in my purse. I immediately reached for my purse and grabbed the metal box. I raised my hand to strike the window with the edge of the box, but Pale's face appeared, his pupils a small opening to utter the most inhuman shriek I ever heard. It caused me to drop my box. I looked around the ceiling for it, but Pale jerked the car and my cigarette box tumbled underneath some garbage. I shifted everything in an all-out panic. The discordant groan of metal and the increasing hopelessness of my situation was the crescendo of my worst fears. Everything started to get dark, but I found it. I raised my hand to bash out the window, but I saw those horrible sets of yellow eyes. I looked up to see the moon getting further and further away, succumbing to the nothingness that enveloped me, and I was too. The only light in the darkness was the cigarette I had lit that had rolled into the corner. It was almost dead. I grabbed it and breathed life into it as I fed the cigarette. The inside of the car glowed red, dimming every few seconds to burn brighter by another breath of life, like a pulse. It seemed like I smoked through it so quickly, but in reality, why I was afraid of the light going completely out. I opened the cigarette box. I had 5 cigarettes left. I searched for the lighter, but couldn't find it. Desperately, I lit another cigarette, with the dying embers of my last. Smoke filled the car, but I could see them when I took a drag from my cigarette, and the light glowed bright. For their bodies were gray except for Pale's. His was black. He was full of strange holes, like his skin had been stretched too far and ripped. 3. The other creatures he called his friends milled about the car. Pale smiled. He knew I was nearing my last cigarette. Despite my trepidation, I edged to the window to see if I could see the moon, barely too. It was so dark down here. I realized the moon was getting farther away. No, I was still sinking. My cigarette started dying. 1. I breathed shakily, and Pale's toothy smile spanned wider. I heard him in my head ask me to meet his friends, but this time it was a whisper. Each time he asked more loudly. His friends, the gray ones, begged me not to go cheerily at first, but the deeper I sunk, the deeper, even more desperate their voices became. The cigarette went out. 0. He liked that story 5. Doppelganger. Prologue. Doppelganger is a German word that literally means double-goer. Legend has it that if you see your doppelganger, you will die. There are many true instances where this has occurred. For example, in 1860, right after winning the presidential election, Abraham Lincoln had a vision of his doppelganger. It happened while he was laying on his lounge in his bed chamber. Lincoln could see his full reflection in a mirror on his bureau, only there was something odd about it. It looked like he had 2 distinct faces, about 3 inches apart. When he stood up, the illusion melted away, and when he lay back down, he saw it again. Lincoln also noticed that one of the faces was paler than the other, almost ghostly pale. He went on with the excitement of the day, almost forgetting about the vision in the mirror. He was still a bit troubled by what he saw, so he decided to tell his wife. A few days later he was able to see the image again, but after that he was never able to see it. It wasn't for lack of trying, because Lincoln even tried to recreate the doubling effect for his wife to see, but he was never able to. Why Lincoln was extremely worried about the image and thought it was an omen that he would be elected a second time, but would not live through the second term. There's blood on my hands, but it's fine. I'm fine. I am not hurt. No one knows I was. Here tonight, no one saw me come in except for my prime, and he won't be telling anyone. Now he doesn't have a voice. I feel giddy. My feelings are overpowering me. These feelings are driving me insane. Where I'm from, we don't even know how to feel. I don't even think the people there are aware of their own existence. Why should we be when our primes are making all our decisions for us? My prime, the man I killed, was the opposite. He has a wife, friends, family, freedom. He decided where we should go and what we should do, but not anymore. Now my prime is lying lifeless on a fine oriental rug. His blood is forming a dark circle around his body. I have the same rug where I'm from, only the pattern is reversed. I look around the room. It seems familiar and yet strange. I have been in this room many times, but not in this room. The brown leather couch, the glass coffee table, the matching end tables, they all were the same and yet so different. Where I'm from, everything is reversed, and we all follow whatever our prime decides to do. Our primes are our masters on the other side of the barrier, the B. Aria is what separates me from my prime's world. If my prime looks into a pool or a spoon or any other reflective surface, I will be there looking back at him mindlessly, doing whatever he does. Everyone on my side is a slave to their prime's will. I remember when I was born, my prime was reflected in a camera lens. I was being held by my prime's mother, only it wasn't his it was her puppet, and I was his puppet, only I didn't realize it. At the time, my prime's mother kissed him and loved him because he was her baby. I was kissed only because that is what the puppet was taught to do. The camera flash, stealing a bit of my prime's soul and giving it to me. It was at that moment when I was not like the rest of the people in my world who followed whatever the primes did without question or objection. I was different. At that moment I was aware of myself. When we were young, my prime was fascinated with me, and I with him. We would look at each other with wide-eyed wonder. At that time we were equals, and neither of us really knowing who was prime as we grew older, though it was clear that he in control. I was fine with it at first. I loved my prime man. I would do anything for him. Sometimes he would talk to me and ask me questions. I wanted to answer him, but I couldn't. I had no voice to speak with. I wanted to connect with him and tell him what I thought about the world and the journey we were taking. I wanted to answer for myself. I wanted to let him know I was alive, that I loved him. I thought maybe he loved me too. Slowly, though, over the years I started to realize that my prime didn't see me as an equal. He didn't seem to think I was alive at all. My prime took me for granted. He would make me do foolish and bizarre things he wouldn't dare show the rest of the world. He used me for his own amusement. It didn't matter what I wanted because he controlled me. He would even look at me with disdain sometimes. I wondered why he would look at me like that. I didn't do anything except for follow him. 5 years ago, my prime met a beautiful woman with long curly hair. She made us smile every day. We laughed at her jokes and spent a lot of time with her. My prime fell in love, and so did I. The happiest day of my life was when my prime decided he wanted to marry her. He told me first to He practiced saying the words in front of me. I wished that I could be the one to ask her. I wanted to switch places with my prime just once, but I couldn't, so I just followed him. She said yes, and we were soon married in the spring. The wedding was beautiful. I pretended that I was the one saying the vows, although I would have said them differently if I could. One night my prime and his wife lay in bed sleeping. This was always my favorite part of the day. My prime turned over and faced away from her. I wondered why I did that. I loved the wife with all my heart, and I wanted to see her face. My prime was fast asleep, and the connection between us was weak. So I did something I thought was impossible. I gathered my strength, hardened my resolve, and turned over. I looked the wife in the face with my own eyes and with my own free will for the first time in my life. My heart leapt. Her soft hair curled in long locks around her sleeping face. Her body moved up and down at a slow, constant pace. I looked into her face and kissed her on the forehead. I truly loved her. No, it wasn't her, it was her prime that I loved. I turned away from the lifeless dawn next to me and went back to following my prime. My true love was on the other side of the barrier. After that, every day was a torture. Every kiss which I used to share, so much was a dagger plunged into my heart. I was jealous of my prime. I loved her more. There was no way anyone could love her as much as I did, and yet he gets to be with her, and I was stuck behind the barrier with her puppet. I had to break free. I had to break my connection with my prime completely and cross the barrier that kept me away from my love. I couldn't live in this world as a slave to my prime any longer. I had to be free. I waited and observed the barrier that kept our worlds apart. There were certain times and places where it was thinner than others, when the reflective surface was dark like a T.V screen, or when the reflective surface was foggy like the bathroom mirror. I looked more like a shadow than I did my prime, and the connection weakening. When my prime was sleepy or intoxicated, he held less power over me, and I knew I could use this to my advantage. I practiced moving on my own at night, and I was eventually able to move around freely whenever I wanted. All my prime would see was a shadow that passed in the corner of his eye. Of course, when he looked at me directly, the connection was strengthened again, and I was slave to his. Finally my chance to leave my prison came when my prime's wife bought a full-length antique mirror. She didn't know it, but the mirror was coated in mercury, a poisonous and magical element. She hung it in the living room because of the strange qualities in the mercury. The barrier between worlds was so thin, all I needed was for my prime to look away, and I knew I would be able to cross. I had already planned out the exact time to escape. Sometimes in the middle of the night my prime took me through the living room and into the kitchen. He never turned the lights on and never woke his wife. I would make the switch and throw him across the barrier to be my puppet, so I could be the prime. I was ever ready for the night when he would sleepily pass the antique mirror and we'd howl, trade places forever. Tonight it finally happened. On this cold December night my prime woke from his slumber. He put on his robe and left the bedroom. Anticipation rose in my stomach as he led me down the stairs and into the living room. He passed the mirror, and I easily broke through. I leapt out of the old mirror and landed safely on the other side. My prime didn't notice me at all. I grabbed him from behind and pushed him into the mirror. It didn't work. Instead, the mirror broke into pieces, and my prime cut his head on the glass. He cried out in pain, and I felt the wound on my head, too. I checked my forehead. Normally I would be bleeding, but not this time. I smiled. I was uninjured, but our connection was so strong I still felt my prime's pain. My prime tried to pull himself up off the floor. I could feel the mirror pulling me back in. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt him. Honestly, that was not my intent. If he looked at me directly, I knew I would be a reflection again. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted my freedom. I took one of the glass shards in my hand. I couldn't go back inside the mirror. Not once I had my freedom. I used my hand to cover his mouth. His face was hot and blood streamed down his forehead. I cut open his throat with the mirror. He made a gurgling noise as the blood gushed from his neck. He fell in a heap on the oriental rug. Now he is lying here on the floor dead, and my hands are covered with his blood. I look at his lifeless eyes and laugh like a madman. I wanted my freedom at any cost, but now that I tease time to pay, I don't know if I can. All my life I have depended on my prime to make all my decisions. He was always there, even when I hated him, when I wanted to be free of him and tried so hard to break our connection. He was still my life. What about my love, his wife? Would she really accept me as him? And if she did, she would still only love me because she loved him. I know now why we don't cross to the other side. The doppelganger cannot survive on the other side of the barrier, or even when they are dead, our primes will still control us. I laugh again, even louder this time. It feels good to have a voice. I feel myself slipping into a giddy madness. The overwhelming burden of freedom strikes me hard. I have never really had to decide anything for myself. I have never had to pull myself up, calm myself down, or build anything with my own hands. My hand in my hand is the shard of mirror I used to end my prime's life. I should kill myself. So my prime and I are the same. We need to be the same. Story 6. The Wendigo. I'm hungry. I don't usually wake up hungry. Usually a post-sleep panic grips my stomach and doesn't let go for 2 or 3 hours, 5 if I was drinking the night before. Even if it was a little bit, I won't tolerate breakfast. Today was different. I got out of bed and searched the fridge for some eggs. I know I had them, but maybe Frankie made off with a few after salvaging some from the bottom drawer. I cooked them. I didn't have work anyway, so I had time. Last night, Frankie and went out to dinner for our 6-month anniversary. I was taking her out to the Thai restaurant we love, but she suggested a new one. It's not really Thai, Burmese, I think, she said over the phone. It just opened up on Milton Avenue, near the Chase. That's not a really busy area, though, is it? No, but it'll be quiet and romantic. I could picture her half-smile as she said it. All right, sure, I'll come by it. I looked at the clock. 7:30. I gotta get the gum out of Moxie's for before I shower. The restaurant was hidden nearly between a nail studio with bright pink awnings and a closed Jewish deli. The building was a thin, 4-story block without a single light on in it. I looked at Frankie. This down here, she said, somewhat exasperated. She led me down a set of narrow, steep stairs on the left side of the building, over which the words "Faux Chop" were written. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Megan's the one who told me about it. She came here last night with Rod." The restaurant itself was warm, comfortable. Soft lights hung on the walls. The floor was cushioned with maroon carpet. Fish stacks stood here and there between a series of two-person tables. The waiter hurried out to us from the kitchen. "Ah, welcome, sir and madam. Welcome to Faux Chop. Please sit." He ushered us to the nearest table to drink. "You both must be thirsty. You must be hungry, please." He pushed menus into our hands. "Water's fine for me," I said, looking at Frankie. "Two waters." I scanned the menu as the waiter bustled off. "That guy's a real go-getter," I smiled. "Shut up," she laughed. "Seriously, don't embarrass me everywhere." The waiter rushed by. "CK with 2 glasses to eat, sir and madam." I scanned the menu. "I don't really. What do you suggest?" "Ah, sir. Well, you must try mohinga. Burmese national dish, sir. Tender rice and fish. Soup, onions, garlic, lemongrass. Serve with minced pork, sir." He smiled. His tongue flicked out against his upper lip. "Sure, yes. I'll have that," I said. "Guyan Thok," Frankie said, without missing a beat. He whipped the menus from our hands. "Excellent," he said loudly, and hurried back to the kitchen. A connoisseur, you eyed her and sipped from the glass at salad with ginger and beans. "I had it once, and I loved it. It wasn't Thai, but it wasn't bad. The pork definitely had a weird bitterness to it, but with enough soy sauce it was unnoticeable." "Not bad, huh?" Frankie said as we mounted the stairs. "Exactly, it was not bad. There's bad, and this was not. Come on, it was all right at least. We should have gone to Sri Thai. It was fine." "Shut up, asterisk, 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 asterisk. I only had 4 eggs left this morning, for was all I could find. When I was cooking them, my stomach's growls turned to pangs. It hurt. I ate all 4 in under 3 minutes. I shredded cheddar cheese over them. I threw in peppers and onions and olives. I inhaled them through the napkin down. But I was still hungry. But that didn't make any sense. I should be at the point of throwing it all up right now. I looked down at my plate, at the tiny flecks of egg on the corner of the table. Maybe if I scraped those up, but those weren't enough. I headed to the couch to let myself digest. Maybe it has to hit my stomach. Just give it some time. Still hungry, then I'll feel full enough to put me back to bed. I waited, my stomach growled. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. 3 hours later, the fridge was empty. Greasy Tupperware lay on the floor, tinfoil with burn marks clinging to the rack in my stove. I ate every slice of cheese, meatballs, Dutch chocolate ice cream, whole tomatoes, leftover steak, frozen burgers. I pulled down a tin of lasagna so hard it flipped and splattered over the floor. I scooped it up with my hands, shoveled it into my mouth like a fucking animal. But I was still hungry. I stumbled into the bathroom, weak from hunger. Gripping the sink, I looked into the mirror. Somebody had taken my face and was wearing it as a mask. My cheeks hung off the bone. The bags under my eyes had gone from light purple to pitch black. My pupils were pinpricks, the eyes bloodshot. I was bleach white, except for the red and brown streaks around my mouth from pasta and steak sauce and my hair, was it thinning? Before I had time to take it in, I got distracted. My lips were red, very wonderful. Lie red, I licked them. My stomach groaned again, and I was drooling. Hello, it was Frankie. Before I could swing the bathroom door shut, she was there. You know you left your door open, ass. Oh, if I wanted to hack you up into pieces, I could probably. She had come around the corner. She dropped a plastic supermarket bag and brought her hands up to her mouth. My gee, what happened? I don't know, I said. I'm I'm starving. She looked back over at the kitchen and the overturned containers and flecks of food on the counter and floor, at the drawers ripped out of the fridge. You ate all that? Yes, well, I don't know. Maybe it's food. Boy, this is the opposite of food poisoning. She sat back. You might have to go see a doctor. But I had remembered something. I remembered the dinner we had last night. The food, something was not right about the food. The pork. At the thought of the pork, I started salivating. Spit filled my mouth, ran down my chin, onto my shirt. What the fuck, I'm not even joking, I'm calling 911. What's Megan's address? Double quotes. I what? She stammered, Megan. I roared, finger tearing at my stomach. She went there to faux chop. I need her address. I'm dying. I didn't even realize how close I had gotten to her. She backed against the counter. Her fingers gripped the edge. I could see the green irises in her wide eyes. Could see her cheeks, her delicious cheeks. I don't She closed her eyes, trying to remember. I stepped towards her, looking at those cheeks, puffing in and out with her heaving breath. If I could rule, hasty taste. 166 Woodhaven Road, she spluttered, opening her eyes. She screamed when she saw my proximity, pushed me hard in the chest, and sprinted out of the apartment. Asterisk, 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 I sprinted for miles to Megan's apartment. I burst into the lobby, scanned the listing for Conley, and ran up the stairs for a time to the third floor. Megan, I bellow, head pounding the door. Megan, open up. It had swung open at the first knock. A wave of warm air hit me. It carried the sickly sweet odor of stagnant rotting, of roadkill left in a garbage bag. I gagged, Megan. No answer. I stepped into the apartment. All the lights were on. Megan, I walked down the hall past the kitchen, covering my mouth. Her fridge hung open, empty. Its contents were scattered along every surface. Butter and packets of turkey bacon, and yogurts apparently flung at the walls, pans on the stove full of chicken and rice, sitting in a layer of cold oil. The floor was covered in milk and onions and dressing and broken eggs and blood from roast beef. But that was a lot of blood, and it weighed too dark for beef. Megan, I know you're in here. Let's go. Come out and tell me what the fuck's happened. But I had turned the corner to the living room. When I registered what I saw, I half screamed and fell backward. If I hadn't lines, the stench surely would have knocked me down. Megan was kneeling in the middle on a carpet saturated with blood. Flies numbering in the hundreds covered the floor, the walls, the TV screen, everywhere their W. As blood, the lamp near the window sizzled, the dry blood stuck to it. Rod was on the couch to my right. He was face down, his head torn nearly off, hung off the side of the couch by a flap of skin. His back was opened up, like someone had put a shovel in and popped it up in both directions. I could see right into the cavity. It was empty except for maybe a piece of his lung. His intestines were clumped at the floor, one long strand still running back inside him like an umbilical cord. His calves were carved down to the bone. Maggots poked their heads out of the shredded meat, and his thighs. The head stared. The upside-down, eyeless, lipless thing grinned over at me, still on the floor. I shook Megan. What did YUDD do? She wasn't listening. She was ripping at a thick hunk of meat in her hands, eating with heavy, guttural sounds. I crawled over. Megan, answer me, please. I touched her shoulder. A clawed hand flew up. Fingers hooked into the side of my face. Ah, Megan W., it's U.S., she shrieked, whipping around onto all fours. Her face was gaunt, hollow, white ITs. U.S.? She was grinning, slivers of rod hanging from between her teeth. She wheezed a laugh, her tiny pupils fixated on mine. Nothing to eat but people. Nothing else will do. She laughed again, wildly, blood or mucus rattling in her throat. I couldn't answer. I was backing away on all fours, scrabbling to get away. My eyes looked right into hers. There was a dead, animal look in them. My gaze trailed downward. Her cheeks were gaunt, but still enough meat on there. Be pretty. Good. I stopped thinking. I only watched myself stand up over her, watch myself dive at her hunched body, watch myself pin her to the ground. I felt my mouth open and my teeth sink into the side of her face, closing, teeth grinding, her hot blood squirting down my throat. She cried out, grabbing at my hands, my arms. I couldn't have noticed. A tender, warm comfort flowed from my mouth outward as I swallowed. My stomach churned its appreciation. I took another bite. This time I found my way down to her throat. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see her molars from the hole I'd left. As I pulled back, I felt tendons pop, muscles tear. Hot, sticky blood soaked my face. My eyes showered down over me, and I swallowed whole, laughing, giggling with the feeling of real food, savory, healing meat. I heard Megan gurgle out of the hole in her throat. I looked up, closed my eyes, breathed in deep, letting the fetid stink of the room flood into my lungs, felt my stomach start working greedily, and tranquility flooded over me. I fell back next to Megan, who was fingering the hole in her throat, feeble. Why? Her mouth hanging open. My heartbeat slowed. I felt a soft glow behind my closed eyelids. I lay there for what could have been years. I felt like my life had been leading up to this glorious moment. This one feeling of release, like a cyst had been suddenly drained. I felt like I could die right here, right now, happy. But the glow got dimmer, the light started to fade. Rapidly, the happiness was leaving me. My breath was becoming shorter. I sat up, seeing the room bathed in blood and the two corpses lying there. I felt something feverish and I'm hungry. Story 7. Lapse. Have you ever had a lapsing dream? It's a very real thing, but I don't talk to many people and I pay little attention to the media, so it is difficult to know what is unique to my mind and body. I turned the concept into a creepypasta because it scares me, or it frustrates and upsets me at the very least. A lapsing dream is entirely separate from more widely discussed occurrences in sleep like lucid dreams or paralysis incidents. It is not as immediately scary as sleep paralysis. but as someone who has suffered from both types of dream, I believe lapses to be the more insidious of the two. A lapsing dream lies somewhere between the illogical realm of fragmented dreams, which don't seem to be very different from normal dreams except for their poorly defined and difficult to remember chronologies and the timeless void of dreamless sleep. Lapsing dreams only seem to happen, or at least I remember them to only happen, at either edge of a period of restful sleep or throughout the course of poor, non-restful sleep. During a lapsing dream, random shards of thought or information spontaneously dart through the dwindling stream of consciousness, popping in and out in extremely quick succession, as if hopping crossways over the mental flow. Sometimes a lapse is composed of succinct, discrete bits of meaningless information that are too small in volume to hold any meaning. Other times a lapse is composed of an amorphous mash of many little thoughts ran together. All thoughts experienced in a lapsing dream do not appear, are in any tangible format such as text, imagery, or sound. They are all raw and unprocessed, and how they are able to be perceived, let alone remembered, is unexplainable. Any perception of self and existence is lost during a lapsing dream, but the experience is still present and able to be remembered. When someone has a lapsing dream, they do not see black or any other color, which separates this type of dream even further from all other kinds. So why are lapses more scary than nightmares or sleep paralysis? Well, I think that lapses have the ability to slightly alter a person's perception of reality. Lapses have a strange place within the continuum of the mind and sleep. Having a lapsing dream is probably as close as one can get to experiencing a deep, dreamless sleep, yet they occur at the times when the mind is most active and the consciousness is strongest during rest. That said, they seem to draw together areas of the mind that are usually kept separated, and the residual effects of lapsing dreams extend into the waking world in strange ways. After any given lapse, I woke up with memories that were entirely real to me until I noticed the absence of a particular object, location, or person, or someone belied the truths that had just manifested in my head. I know from reading various forums that it is not a very rare occurrence for AMS to cause false memories, nor is it a phenomenon exclusive to lapses, but this is somewhat different. Memories created by a lapse are very strong regardless of how implausible or glaringly false they are. After a lapse, somebody who had lost a loved one after a major tragedy might believe that the person lost was still very much alive, or that a tragedy had never taken place at all, and when that person's memory is nullified by the truth, they might suffer the same grief that they went through when they were first exposed to news of the death. I know this to be true because I have been affected by lapsed memories multiple times. There have been many times throughout my life where I remembered owning items, usually things that I greatly desired, that I did not actually possess, or where my knowledge of the layout of a building or environment was overridden until I visited the altered locations. The most notable and exceptional cases concern a long-dead family pet and a grandparent who had died long before I was born. When I woke up one morning, I went into the living area of my house confident in the knowledge that I'd be greeted by my parents' fluffy white dog Princess, who had been around since before my conception. I soon found out that Princess had died years ago, but I felt like I just lost my pet. I do not want to talk about my grandparent's death in detail, but it is important to point out that I felt someone who I had never met was with me. The incident with my dog presents another strange anomaly caused by lapsing dreams, distortion of the perception of time. After waking up that morning, I was missing a huge chunk of my memory. Of course, this occurred during the earlier portion of my childhood, and the hippocampus tends to be rather unreliable during that period, but what I experienced was far different than the gradual fading of memories. Additionally, I have the gift of being able to remember many scenes from my early life with extreme detail, including some from before the lost period. My recognitive ability does not, however, negate the fact that I am missing multiple years' worth of memories, including the time when my dog died. I still do not remember witnessing or even hearing about my dog's death, even though I remember almost every detail about her looks and some details, although they may be confabulations about my interactions with her. That is the power of a lapse, and they have not stopped since my childhood. The extent of their effects does not end with the alteration of experiences committed to memory. Either lapses can also alter a person's moment-to-moment perception of the passage of time. By the supple age of 15, I felt like a setting, and in a few respects, I didn't have the maturity or the experience of someone so old, and I knew that. But I was speeding through time like someone who had already experienced their entire life. Of course, the acceleration of time is a constant that affects everyone, but the shift in perception that I experienced was far too large and obvious to simply discount as a mere unpleasant marker of age. Even now, when I look at my old digital clock sitting behind me on my dresser, I can see the delimiter blinking twice as fast as I remember it going in the past. Whole minutes run freely by whenever I do not concentrate on the clock, even when I do focus on every instance of a second, trying to limit the implacable forward drive of time like an under-equipped traffic officer. The very moment still seems fleeting. I am not sure why lapsing dreams do this, but I have noticed that during instants occurring on the latter end of a rest, there are sometimes very brief periods where the afflicted will regain a nominal level of consciousness. When these short bursts of wakefulness happen multiple times between intervals ranging from a few minutes to a few hours every morning, a cognitive effect of time traveling is created. It does not seem unreasonable to believe that an individual's sense of time might be residually skewed from witnessing chronologically distant moments in quick succession. Time is barely perceived during a lapsing dream, but I do not have the knowledge or the means to prove such a belief with empirical evidence or anything else. It is also impossible to tell if the problem is caused or exacerbated exclusively by interrupted lapses, or if this phenomenon is no worse than segmented sleep. Lapses clearly diverge from regular dreams by a large amount. They present no tangible images, feelings, or sounds. All of their effects on temporal perception and the psyche are latent and lasting, as opposed to contained within the doctor, or, in the case of a nightmare, a short period during and after a dream, and they only seem to be partially connected to the unconscious system, holding no meaning or symbols. Unlike normal dreams, they certainly do not represent a defense mechanism or a manifestation of desire. I was not particularly regretful that I never got to meet my grandfather until I lost his confabulatory phantom to the truth, and I was much too young to understand the solemn concept of death when my dog actually died. Although objects that I desired were commonly written into my memory, so were our items and locations that had nothing to do with my emotions. If I am the only person afflicted by this, then perhaps lapsing dreams are an unappreciated but necessary mechanism of my powerful memory. It may be plausible, but there are a few other details about lapses that might negate such a possibility. If a memory of a location is overwritten or created by a lapse, there is a chance that the mental image of the location will be extremely mesmerizing. The arrangement of light within the visualization will have an intoxicating effect on the mind, and the visualization might stave. And after the overwritten memory has been corrected, the effect is impossible to describe beyond this as the manner in which the light and the image is configured and the way that it influences the afflicted cannot be communicated verbally. The phenomenon is far too idiosyncratic and intangible for anybody to fully understand without experiencing it themselves. However, despite being hard to describe, these otherwise normal images, steeped in an otherworldly aura, are very real and very powerful to me. They are so pleasant that I have gained a love for nature and the inadvertent aesthetic of the environment just by being exposed to them, and as if being driven by Jung himself, I find myself drawing trees and other natural structures at random. It is when I make drawings and doodles that I think about those hexing visages, and I wonder about their cause and purpose. The most memorable of the images are usually very similar in form to an actual location that I have sighted but glazed over with a magical sheen. Others are more unfamiliar, and some are even abstract, but they all show an empty environment filled with nature, certain pieces of infrastructure, or a stark sky. A lot of them seem expressionistic in a way, which brings me to my point. I believe that the images of real locations are skewed by an enigmatic force because they show something that we cannot normally see. The rapid exchange of impalpable information during a lapse may serve to decode a moment of perception that the occipital lobe is not capable of handling. But what is a lapse doing when memories of people or events are falsified or entirely fictional locations are generated? I believe that lapses are as close as any being can get to witnessing and knowing annihilate. Why, the zero state. When a person dies, their brain goes out with a flurry of activity, and final dreams may occur. When a person is anesthetized, there are no dreams to be had, and nothing is experienced or remembered. I have walked in the fog, blind and deaf and stripped of somatic being, but I was still able to know something and remember it. Maybe the images of unseen things and the dead come from somewhere further down than the bright lights of our great scientific and analytical minds have yet shown. Maybe a lapsing dream is a toe dip into the watery membrane demarcating eternal spaces. Maybe I have written nothing special and a worldly, predictable logic I am totally ignorant of tightly binds and regulates the dreams. I have no way of understanding the enigma that both plagues and blesses me. I am a weak, sentimental little thing who is probably only drawn to the mystical for fear of a harsher, scientific truth about my problems. Every tick-in attack pangs my existential fears as time is continually quickened, and my prized achievements and emotional treasures are slid to the edge of a steep mantle. Every time I go to sleep, I cannot help but speak of the lapsing dream like both a common affliction and a condition unique to me because I would like to think both cases are true. I am rendered lost by its mysteries, and I am too confused to write. Can I walk into that terrible fog even during the day? My mind has rolled onto a tangential track, and I am lost. It seems that this curse of mine is not something that I can speak about freely. It is awfully late. The server administrator can confirm this if the submission date is accurate. When this is set in, it is time for me to sleep.